Well, hello, and welcome to Lessons from the Sidelines, which is brought to you from the Harbaugh Coaching Academy, of which I'm a proud member to be a part of not only that academy, but of that family. And I'm also proud when we get people on here that I think are going to absolutely just crush it on what you can learn especially after they've been in the business of whatever they've done for so long, and they get a new vision or a new recalibration on what matters, what doesn't matter. And I think there's just so much to be learned from that, and we have that today. We have someone that I've had respect for a long time. Was an outstanding player in college. Has been a college coach for a long time, and now is with Just Play Sports Solutions, and that is Chris Hollender. So, Chris, welcome to Lessons from the Sidelines.
Coach, good to see you. I appreciate you having me on. I'm flattered to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I want to dive right in because you not only played for an outstanding coach, but you worked for some outstanding coaches. And just to give people like a base of you
hmm
and your background, you played for a guy that in coaching circles is a legend. He was a legendary player and assistant coach at Indiana under Bob Knight and Jim Cruz, and he certainly did the same when he was with Evansville and Army in St. Louis. And tell us the biggest lessons you learned as a player and as a coach that probably you apply every day in your life that you got from Jim Cruz.
Well, Coach was again, you hit it on the head. He's probably one of the most least talked about great coaches in recent memory. He was a great player at Indiana. He was a senior on the last undefeated team in college basketball history. In fact, he's immortalized with one of the biggest statues in Assembly Hall, right in the middle there. And then went on to be an assistant for Coach Knight, won national championship as a player, won national championship as an assistant coach, and then went to Evansville as a head coach for, I believe he was there 17 years and did an incredible job there. After Evansville, went to West Point, a really difficult job. And then from there, he went with Coach Majerus after he left West Point and spent a couple years there as an assistant, and then took over for Coach when he tragically passed away. Um, you know, Coach Cruz was the ultimate teacher, right? There was never a moment in the time that I was with him as a player or as a coach where he wasn't trying to help the people around him get better. Whether we were in the airport traveling to a game and we had some time, because back then, in Evansville, there was no chartering, right? So we'd have to jump on a plane in Evansville, go to St. Louis, and then go to Wichita or Missouri State or wherever. And he would grab you in the airport and talk to you about things that you could get better at. And it was a constant every single day of teaching and coaching. And his whole purpose was to help you get better as a player, but then the real purpose for him was to help you grow as a man. And I, I owe everything to Coach. My experience at Evansville led to my career. My experience at Evansville led to my family. And so everything, when you lean into people, my father passed away 20 plus years ago. And if there's a major event in my life or something I need help with, that's the first phone call I make.
See, that's the ultimate, and that's Jim Harbaugh has said that on here before that he wants to be the coach, the best coach that anybody has ever played for, and it's not just because he knew the most about football or knew the most about making them better, it's because he cared about them the most. And ultimately, that's what you're saying about Jim Cruz. One thing well, there's a lot of things that have impressed me about your career, but one common denominator that I think is great for people to hear is you've been in some very challenging situations, and where you didn't have the resources that everybody else had. You didn't have maybe the tradition that everybody else had. Even going to Mississippi State, and you guys were tasked with the job of cleaning up a program that really didn't have a lot of respect. They had respect because they won, but they didn't have respect necessarily because of how they were doing it when you guys got in there, and you had to walk into that. And even at Missouri, because you worked for Conzo Martin, if you had to pick two or three things for that leader, for that coach, for that parent, whoever's out there that is dealing with challenging times, that doesn't have everything that maybe everybody else does. How would you break that down? What would you tell them?
Well, to your first point, Coach, I think the one thing with the jobs that I did have was, when I started in coaching, I got my start with my college coach. So that was an easy thing for me to do, is to go with him because of the relationship, and I knew what he was about. And he always implored me to never chase jobs, but always chase people, right? And so all the jobs that I've had, whether it's West Point, Evansville, UMKC, Mississippi State, Missouri, I've always been around a high character leader. And the one thing that all those guys have in common is that when things get tough and things are hard, they always leaned into their character, right? And when you lean into your character and things get difficult, you can make 1,000 excuses of why you can't do this or why you shouldn't be able to do that. But when you lean into your character and you lean into the character of the leader of the program, it's a guiding light for you as a coach, right? It allows you to be yourself. It allows you to coach guys hard because you're doing things the right way. You're doing things for the right reasons, and that would be my, again, I mean, we've had some things in my family here over the last couple of years that have been unexpected, and there's no blueprint for them. And you just have to lean
Sure.
into your character and lean into the things that have been a guiding light for you over the years.
Well, and you bring up so many good points with that, and I think what I've always been impressed with you and the people that you've worked for is there was never
Right.
excuse making, right? It was like we're going at it, and I think that speaks to the character of you, the people that you've worked with, and how you've gone about it. Well, now you're in a business, though once a coach, always a coach. There's no doubt about that, but you're in a business that is in really the business of helping coaches and programs. And before we dive into this, because I think people are going to really gain a lot in this analytic number world about what really matters, what doesn't, and then we're going to dive into some of the better teams on both sides of the ball and hit those aspects. But tell us not only how you got in with Just Play Sports Solutions, but really how would you sum up what Just Play Sports Solutions is really all
Yeah,
about?
so the company was started in 2015. I was an assistant coach at UMKC. Essentially, I was sitting in my office, and this 20-year-old kid walks in my office and goes, "Hey, I have an idea." I play, and his name's Austin Barone. He's one of the smartest guys you'll ever be around. He's really ambitious, has an incredible entrepreneurial spirit. But he walks in, he goes, "Hey, I play football at Kansas," and he played for Charlie Weiss at the time, and he's a kicker on the football team. And he said, "Hey, we're really trying to affect the learning curve with our football program." He's like, "I sit in the locker room. We have playbooks that are this thick, that constantly get moved in and out. But when I walk into the locker room, I see guys on their phones." And so what he was trying to do was bridge the gap on as technology was evolving, the learning for all student athletes was changing in the classroom or all around them. And that's essentially how the genesis of the idea came about. Now we work with 1,300 plus teams across 4 sports. We're in the NBA, WNBA, NFL, NHL. We work with 400 plus Division I teams, and essentially what our goal is to impact winning, right? And in the areas that we impact the most are player teaching, opponent scouting. Now we've gotten into roster management with the way the landscape is changing in college athletics, and then what you talked about with analytics. And what we're most excited about is we've been a leader in the space for coaches on how to better teach their players, how to get them prepared better for years. But now we've really invested heavily in the analytics and the front office side of our platform.
Well, and I think before we get into basketball, let's talk football because obviously you're involved in the NFL. This is an NFL Brothers podcast and Leadership Academy. So let's talk about what you bring in a general view, and then get specific as you want. What you bring to a college or an NFL type franchise with what you
Yeah, I
do.
think the one thing that's constant, and I don't deal with a lot of football stuff, Coach. So I'm going to be general with this, but digital playbooks, having the ability to get in there and get your playbooks organized, and film share and opponent scouting are the three biggest areas in football that we affect. Now with the addition of our roster management, our front office suite that we've added, those are really the main areas of that we affect football. And again, like football is it's different than basketball with play, like talk about playbooks, right? Like, and again, this is an uneducated conversation because I've never been in a football locker room. I don't want to act like I have, but the amount of paper that those coaches go through because one route can change in a play or one coverage can change. You got hundreds of people on the team. The amount of time and effort and energy that goes into getting those playbooks organized, one piece of paper in, one piece of paper out. We're trying to streamline those processes, and we're trying to create a very organized, a very efficient ecosystem for their coaches to get information to their players. The players can have it right at their fingertips with our app, on their phones, on their pads, on their computers, and they can study. They can get prepared, and you can get information to them quickly, as fast as you need to.
What have you learned about, and again, maybe that you didn't know or about football when you look at the numbers, right? When you look at the analytics of football, like what is something that just like, as soon as I say that, like it comes right to your mind? Because obviously we have football people that watch this, but we have a lot of people that are coaching other sports or leading in other areas and raising their family. So like maybe they just want to understand football a little bit better when it comes to their own family. What stands out to you?
Well, I just think the amount of information that those guys have to consume is off the charts, right? I mean, you're talking about the number of plays as compared to I mean, the difference in sports is what's been really, really kind of has been eye opening for me. The amount of information and the amount of plays and the amount of different areas that go into football is far greater than basketball, just strictly on numbers, right? We have 15 people on a college basketball roster, and football rosters are in the hundreds. And so just the ability to manage the players, get the information to the players, making sure that they're consuming the right information, and then getting them to go out and execute. It's been a real fascinating thing for me to see.
Let's talk about some of the general terms, and we're going to get into some evaluation before we get into the teams. But you pick up a box score now. You pick up a post-game box score, and then we're going to get into the stat sheet of a team stats. But you pick up a post-game box score or a halftime box score. Where are your eyes going now?
I would say on a general box score, and I don't look at general box scores much anymore, Coach, right?
Sure. Yeah, but if you're the general person like most
Yeah,
of us.
I would say that I would go directly to offensive rebounds for us and for the opponent, and I would go to turnovers for us and the opponent. And again, like the shooting and the free throws, probably free throw attempts would be my third thing that I would look at just to see if we're where we are in comparison to our opponent. But I think those two things show you the opportunities that you can create, that you have, whether it's halftime or after the game. That's probably where I would start, and then I would dig into the other things after that.
Do you look more at rebound differential or rebound percentage when you're looking
Rebound
at
percentage
it?
for sure.
Explain that to to
Well,
people.
I think that like you have to just look at it as opportunities to get rebounds, right? And so if you are dominating the percentage of rebounds that are available to you, then you're doing a great job rebounding the basketball, right? And the same thing on the offensive rebounding end. Well, we don't have a lot of offensive rebounds. We didn't get a lot of offensive rebounds. Well, we shot 65% in the first half, so there wasn't a lot of offensive rebounds available. And so you have to go to the percentages when you're talking about, in my opinion, you have to go to the percentages of the rebounds available to see what type of job you're doing on the glass.
How valuable is a 5-game, 10-game, or just the general team statistics? When you're looking at the individual players and you're looking at the team statistics, if you had to give advice to people to really dive in and see where they're at, because I know what I always looked at as a coach, but what would you tell people
just on the general that's available to everybody? I think that when I look at games, I go back 5 games. When I was a coach, I would go back 5 games. Depending on where we were in the season, I would go 5 games back, and I would look at games maybe versus like opponents, right? Maybe versus or games that were decided by single digits, even though they may not be like opponents, because I feel like you can get a better grasp of a team over the course of 5 games. Sometimes it may take 7 games. I don't think there's an exact number of games to go back and look at. I've worked with coaches that would go back 3 games. I worked for coaches that would watch all 10 games. But I think 5 games is a pretty consistent number. And then, but then you have to dig into what the games were like, what the results of the games were like, who the opponents were, and try to match up what makes sense for your team, right? And so, I mean, I don't know what you used to do when you'd had your staff, looking at stuff, but I think you get a pretty good feel for, over the course of 5 games, you're looking at 300 plus, 350 plus, possessions for a team offensively and same defensively.
Well, I think, and that's good because I think there's so many different ways to look at it, and that's what you want. You want variety, but we're going to get to the next question after this: is how do you get the players to get it? For me, I was always looking at any game that was a +6 or a -6, and I wanted to look. I wanted to look at the last 5 minutes. Now you had to look at the box score because maybe it ended up being 12 in the last minute because of free throw shooting, but maybe it was a 4-point game with 3 minutes to go. So you want to see all of that. And I wanted to see that video-wise. I wanted to see those numbers. I wanted to see, especially in the preseason, what we were the previous year, what somebody was against the top 6 defenses, the top 6 offenses. What our numbers look like there. I loved 5 and 10. I loved head-to-head. And one thing that I think you do such a great job of with all of this, and I've always looked at it, but I don't look at it nearly as close, or I look at it much closer now than I did. And that's what you do with really looking at the level of the opponent and breaking down in the basketball world, breaking down the high Division I versus the guarantee type games. And I think for anybody on here, whether they're coaching high school, whatever they're coaching, right? There's a way to break those numbers down and to try to gauge that. So when you break, let me ask this question. When you break down, let's say these are their numbers against the 5 high Division I teams they've played. These are the numbers against the 5 guarantee games. And the numbers are obviously going to be different, right? How do you view that in the sense of getting a really good snapshot for a coach to be able to get things across to his team with those differences?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because I think each team probably is different in where they are as a program, where they are as at that point as a team. You and I've talked about this a lot. I really like to dig into lineups, and I really like to see player impact in lineups. We talked about Arizona, right? We've talked about Arizona quite a bit this year, and they have a fantastic team. I believe they're still undefeated. They've played a very good schedule, but they haven't played as many high major games as some of their the other team. Michigan's played more high major games than they have, and so. But the one, like we talked about, the young man Burries for Arizona, right? And when you're looking at these teams and you're trying to figure out what makes them go, I always like to look at, okay, let's take a look at Burries, for example. In high major games, when Burries is on the floor, they've played 6 high major games, so there's a total of 240 minutes available. They haven't played any overtime games.
Sure.
Well, they're plus 92 when he's on the floor in 160 minutes of game. It's an amazing stat. For a freshman, right?
It is.
But then you go,
Absolutely.
so they're a really good team, so they got to be really good with him when he's not in the game. Well, there's been 80 minutes with him not in the game, and they're -5, and so that player's impact is so important for Arizona right now that's something as a coach that is scouting or getting prepared for Arizona that I know that I want to try to get him out of the game, or I have to make sure that we're aware, even though the other guys are getting more attention nationally. This young man is super important, and so I feel like you get a better feel for teams that are equal to your level, or You can throw games in there when, you haven't played your best, and you can try to figure out why that other team, maybe they were not at your level. But those are the ways that you can really evaluate your team. You can evaluate your opponent, and you can dig into the things that are deeper than just, oh, this guy averages 12 points a game and 3 assists, right? Well, his impact on winning, we just heard Coach Wade, go kind of on a little bit of a rant the other night about his guy, and he's made a comment. He goes, he was plus 13 and didn't make a shot, right? And so there's the impact, the player impact in winning is something that you have to dig into, in my opinion, in order to figure out why really good teams are good.
And we're going to get into those teams here in a second, but this brings up the next question, because I think this can help so many people. When I was at Indiana, I got a chance to be around Mark Cuban, and there were sometimes I got to be around him more than others. And I'll never forget sitting there, and we had a great basketball talk one night for about 2 hours, and I took a lot from it. But we started to talk because Mark and the Dallas Mavericks were some of the forerunners on analytics in the NBA and building their own systems, and using a gentleman by the name of Wayne Winston, who still breaks down lineups and things like that at Indiana. He's a professor at Indiana. But Mark was always so far ahead of the curve, right? And continued to push it. And one thing he made a great point on, like we start talking about lineups, he was always looking for
Yes.
outliers. And I think when I learned that, it made me look at stats and numbers differently. And I bring that up because I think in this world, it's really, really easy, whether you're in broadcasting, whether you're in journalism, whether you're a coach, whether you're a fan, certainly in the gambling
Yeah.
world, it's really, really easy to just dive into the
Yep.
numbers. But unless you understand the numbers, right? And most gamblers understand the numbers. Unless you truly understand what you're looking at, it becomes very, very hard. It becomes almost like white noise. It becomes like there's so much
Yep.
there. What advice do you give the coach, okay, that is going to deal with his players, and to make sure that he's giving them the most important things, because there's a lot of things that go into winning, but giving them the most important things that they need to get ready for each individual game? What would you say?
I would say number one, you have to understand what's important to that coach. You have to
Sure.
understand what their philosophy is, what they hang their hat on, what's the identity of their team. When you watch basketball games, you can quickly find out what the identity of a team is if you really pay attention to how they play the game, right? Take Clemson men's basketball, for example. Their identity is solidified in toughness, grit, defense, and taking, being detailed on everything that they do. Well, how can you see that? Well, if you turn on a Clemson basketball game, all five of their guys are going to be in a stance at all times, right? So that gives you a guiding light to say, okay, defense, details, all these things are important to Clemson basketball, and it shows up in their numbers. They're one of the teams that I'll talk about today. And so I think that's the most important thing is figuring out the philosophy, figuring out what's important to each coach, addressing those things, and then, for example, and then as you go into each individual game, let me stop there, because you have to keep getting better in those areas, right? You have to keep getting better. Your players have to keep getting better as the year goes on. You can't get caught up in all the scouting and opponent scouting when you have to continue to develop your players and the things that are important to you. Now, as you get into scouting, for example, this is an example that I use all the time. About 3 years ago, I was working with an ACC client, and they were getting ready to play North Carolina. And what we try to do is we try to find one or two possessions a half to give you an advantage somewhere, because as you know, once you get into conference play and you start playing these games where teams are very familiar with you, they're familiar with your players, you're going to have to find an advantage. No different than a race car, right? No different than a race car team that's trying to get their car just a fraction of a second faster so they can win those F1 races or the NASCAR races. They're trying to just manipulate something here or there on the car. That's what we're trying to do with basketball. And so I told him, I went and I pulled up back to your point about the number of games. I pulled Carolina's last 8 games, and I was just looking at things that jumped off the page to me. And one of the things that really jumped off the page to me was they had a lot of possessions after their opponents had made free throws where they were scoring in the first 12 seconds and scoring at a very, very high level, like 1.45
Mm-hmm.
points per possession. And that may be just kind of words, but it's a very
Which is
it's a great
enormous.
number, right?
Yeah.
And on like 68% of their possessions after a made free throw, they were scoring high level early in the clock. So I told them, go to the film, find out what they're doing, and let's try to eliminate that area of their game to try to give us an advantage in that area. Because you're not going to take away everything. You just can't. It's an impossible task.
Sure.
And so Carolina had beat the team before. They came to this team's home gym, and I don't believe that Carolina got a point after a made free throw against them, and that team won the game.
Wow.
Now, I'm not
Wow.
saying that that's why they won the game, but it's not why they lost.
It
It
helps.
helps, right? And
Yeah,
so that's
exactly. You're finding
that's
edges.
exactly
You're
we're
finding
trying to
edges.
find an edge. We're trying to find a possession here and there, and we're trying to do those things in scouting, but we're also trying to do those things with our own teams and self scouting. For example, how do you take analytics to the practice floor? Well, maybe there's questions that we have because we might be getting 1.3 points per possession after an opponent's make for a team.
Mm-hmm.
But after a made free throw, we haven't been as successful and we're only at point 0.8. How do we get better? How can we adjust and give ourselves a little bit more of an advantage to get that number up so now we can win one possession in the first half and two more in the second half?
That's what I think you guys do, which is just so unbelievable. And if anybody, if they hear this, if they listen to that, it's worth the podcast alone. But I want you to take the floor now on right where we're at, because we've talked about Arizona, we've talked about Michigan, we've talked about Clemson, and those are three, especially two of them are two best teams in the country right now as we record this. Who are the best offenses right now in college basketball from the way you see it?
Well, I mean, obviously, like,
And take anybody you want. Take any part of offense you
yeah,
want.
I've taken, I've been doing some research on this, um, and I'll start with the obvious one in Michigan. I mean, Michigan is right now they are playing at a level that is equal to all the Final Four. Like, if you take their stats right now and look at all their stats, we did a study last year on the top 20 seeded teams in the NCAA tournament, and we looked at offensive efficiencies, defensive efficiencies, all the areas of their team. And Duke's numbers last year were like outrageous. And right now, Michigan's numbers offensively and defensively are better than Duke's numbers were last year. They're getting their effective field goal percentage coach right now is almost 62%, and they're holding teams to 40% on the effective field goal percentage side. You got a margin of 22% in that area alone. It's going to create wins and big wins, right? I asked Sean Sweeney, a good friend of ours, and I think one of the smartest basketball guys in the business. I said, Sean, if you have to look at one stat that you can tell whether or not the teams are winning or losing or are going to have a great year or not have a great year, what is the one stat that you look at? And he said to me without hesitation, the margin between offensive effective field goal percentage and defensive effective field goal percentage.
Let's, for the purpose of our podcast here, let's make sure explain effective field goal percentage just so everybody that's on here, 100% of them know what that means when they get off the
In
podcast.
layman's terms, basically what it is, it's a formula that gives a higher value to a 3-point shot. It gives value to a 2-point shot. And then there's a formula that works out to show you how well you're shooting those shots combined, right? And so if you have a high effective field goal percentage, that means you're making twos and threes at a pretty good rate. If you have a low effective field goal percentage, you're not making twos and threes. And usually your 3-point percentage is probably a big factor in that because the value of the 3-point shot is higher, right? And so we can look at field goal percentages all day. We can look at all that, but the effective field goal percentage number. And then the other margin that I look at, and I live in the margins now. Like, that's where I live. The other margin I look at is the offensive efficiency or points per possession on offense versus defense, right? And what we found last year, the top 20 seeded teams in the NCAA tournament, according to our numbers, the average margin between offense and defensive efficiency was right around 17 points per 100 possessions. You had some outliers like Duke who were in the 30s, high 30s, right? You had some other teams that were in the single digits or like lower numbers, but the average was 17. And so to give people an idea of what makes good teams good, that's a good number to start with, right? And then I did another study a few years ago on the effective field goal percentage, and when UConn won their last national championship, their margin between offense and defensive effective field goal percentage was 12%. And that's outrageous. That is an outrageous number. And so when we talk about Michigan, Michigan right now is 1.3 points per possession and only giving up 0.89. That's 41 points every 100 possessions that they're better than their opponents so far this year. And they've played a number of like opponents. I believe they've played 7 high major games. So it's not what, there's different levels of competition, but it's not like they're playing a bunch of teams that aren't in the same, conversation as them. They're playing like opponents. They're shooting 75% at the rim, and they're shooting 57% on shots in the paint, not at the rim.
Wow.
And so, they've scored.
57%, that's got to be as high as
Yeah,
anybody,
like
right?
you're not going to see numbers like that. Now, we're talking about 13 games. But that shows that they're doing a lot of tough things offensively. Another thing that really stands out about Michigan, and again, like I could go on and on about Michigan's offensive numbers right now, they've had 364 possessions start with a defensive rebound this year. Okay? In 259 of them, so essentially, what is it, 60 some percent of them, it ends in the first 12 seconds of the shot clock. So the majority of the possessions they start with a defensive rebound end in the first 12 seconds of the shot clock. So they're playing fast. Not only are they playing fast, they're getting 1.44 points per possession on those possessions. So they're in those 12 seconds. So they're turning defense into very efficient, high pressure offense that goes against the defense. I mean, it's just it's an outrageous number, and they're doing an incredible job. If you look at them offensively and defensively, I bet Dusty would have a hard time saying, well, we really need to get. I'm sure he knows better than we do because he watches his team every day and he's in practice every day. But the only thing that I could say that stands out that maybe that they could do a little bit better of a job of is their turnover percentage is about 17%. I would assume he would like that number to go down because, they're just so efficient offensively. The more opportunities you get, the more they're going to score.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got some other teams that you've really paid attention to that some people would understand and some people may not. Who are some of those teams?
And again, I haven't seen everybody, and I know there's a lot of really good offensive teams out there, but some of the teams that I've been able to go watch practice and been around, like, for example, Miami of Ohio. Coach Steele's doing a great job over there. Their numbers are top in the country offensively in almost all areas. You're talking about 94, almost 95 points a game. They're shooting 55% from the field as a team, 64.3% effective field goal percentage, 44% from three, 78% from the free throw line, and they're getting 18 assists a game and 11 turnovers. And they're getting at 1.36 points per possession, and they're 14-0. And when you go watch them practice, like, these are the things that are important to him. He holds these guys to that standard. He's got some experienced guys that have played for him for a little bit, but that's a team right now that I know they're undefeated. They're kind of flying under the radar, but it's just a team that has just been just incredible offensively.
Yeah.
73.
That's kind of team that ends up in the second weekend of the
You
NCAA tournament.
you
that
don't want
nobody
to
saw.
play them, right? Like, you just because they just keep
Exactly.
coming at you, and they come at you in different ways. And their margin is, again, talk about margins. They're 1.31 points, 1.36 points per possession, and 0.98 on defense. So not only are they doing it on the offensive end, they're doing it on the defensive end, which is creating those margins for them, right?
Sure.
So they're doing a great job. 73% at the rim. The other team that I think is, I have a lot of respect for Coach Schertz at SLU. They're doing a really good job. I think they've lost one game, and I think it was a 1-point game at a neutral site. But again, offensively, he has a lot of new pieces. And the one thing, and we can talk about this too, but the one thing that he does have is he has a guy by the name of Robbie Avila or Avila. I don't want to mispronounce his name. Robbie might be he's the best leader I've seen in college basketball. When you go to practice, his voice is louder than most of the coaches. The players gravitate to him, and that's such an advantage for Coach Schertz because he understands his system. He has institutional knowledge of the coaches, the coaching staff, how the system works, and they flow into offense. They're hard to scout against, but like listen to these numbers here. Like they've only had 56 possessions end in the last 6 seconds of the shot clock all season. So they're getting excellent shots early and often. And I think that's what if you ask any coach, that'd probably be the goal is to get the best shot as fast as you can, right? In the first 6 seconds of the shot clock, they get 1.28 points per possession. In the second six, they're 1.43. In the third, they're 1.22. And in the fourth six, they're 1.31 for a total of 1.31 points per possession. And 19 and a half assists a game, only 12 turnovers a game. They've only taken 12 non-paint 2-point shots in 14 games. And so I don't necessarily subscribe to we're not taking long twos. I think that is completely up to the personnel, up to the teams, up to the coaches, and what they're most comfortable with. But if they have a philosophy, they're sticking to their philosophy, and they are not taking many shots outside of the paint. I mean, 40.2% of SLU's shots are at the rim, right? And so when you think about Coach Schertz, his offense, it's a free-flowing, lot of threes, da-da. No, they take a ton of shots at the rim. They put a lot of pressure on that rim. And I think that's one of the things that makes them really, really difficult. I mean, their effective field goal percentage is off the charts, 3-point percentage off the charts. He's doing an incredible job. And, modern basketball, they want to call it, they use terms like layers and scaffolding. But what Coach Schertz is doing is he's running motion, right? And all those guys are on the same page, and they know exactly what their roles are and what they're supposed to be doing when the ball goes. No different than Coach Knight or Coach Cruz or all the great Royce Waltman, all the great motion coaches of all time. He's got his team to buy into. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it, and you got to execute at a high level.
And we're seeing it right now. You mentioned Robbie Avila, and he's a leader, and people in basketball know him. Maybe a lot of other people don't. Well, probably 6-7 months ago, not too many people knew Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss and knew that story. And Fernando Mendoza was not the household name that he is at that period of time. Both guys that had played, one was in Division II, one was at Cal, but they were very low recruits, right? Even Trinidad, I think the ratings came, he was the 60th rated quarterback in the portal. It just goes to show, and there's so many different ways to do it. And when you care, when you have leadership, when you're confident, but Robbie is an outlier. He's a 6'9", 6'10" guy that may lead him in assists, but he's probably as good a passer as there is or as a big guy in the country. And I think those are the kind of things. There's so many different ways to win, and getting your players better, understanding how you want to win is so big. It really is. Let's hit some more offensive teams. Let's hit some more offenses that stand out to you.
Well, I've been on the Vanderbilt train for even before the season started.
Sure.
I got a chance to watch them play this summer, and very close with that staff. Work closely with.
Yeah, you were on Vanderbilt by the second week of November. They were probably 5-0 at that point. So
I'm fortunate to be able to be around those guys. I think Mark is an incredible basketball mind. They did a great job in the portal of recruiting to their system, recruiting to their style. One of the things that they do an incredible job of, Coach, and I think it's something that basketball coaches lean into, and this is what offense really is, right, is making the right decision when the decision needs to be made. And if you watch them play, the whole purpose of offense is to get defenses in rotations, right? We want to get them in rotations. We want to get them out of their shell. That way we can create opportunity to score, whatever. You can't get teams in rotations if you can't make decisions after you've been aggressive. Their guys do an incredible job of making the right decisions when two people get on them. So when they drive the basketball, whether it's a guard, a big, if they're getting doubled in the post, they're coming off a ball screen getting trapped, they make great decisions when there's two people on them, and it's something that it's a really fun to watch, and then what happens then is they become unselfish, right? Because then there's one more pass to make or another opportunity to put pressure on the paint. But it all starts with the guy who makes the initial play to get two people on him, and he makes the right, correct play more 80% of the time.
And you're saying they're drilling that, focusing on it, looking at the numbers every day in practice, and it's one of the reasons that they're undefeated going into this weekend, and people will get an opportunity to see this broadcast on January. What do we got? 6th, January 6th. So they may still be undefeated, but at the time we're taping this on Friday, they definitely are undefeated. That's a great point. Let's bring up another team that's like that because we're running out of time. But Nebraska is very similar to that. Talk about Nebraska.
Nebraska is very interesting because Fred has always had a reputation of being an incredible offensive coach, right? He has an incredible offensive mind. He knows how to manipulate matchups. He does a great job. And I have some numbers on them. One of the things that really stands out about Nebraska this year is their defensive numbers are off the charts right now. Like off the charts, like 37% defensive field goal percentage, 45% effective field goal percentage, and I'm rounding numbers here a little bit. They're guarding the three at 29.7%. Teams are only shooting 17% of their shots against Nebraska at the rim. So they are choking the paint. 17% at the rim and 19.2% on shots in the paint, not at the rim. So only 36% of shots against them are coming in the paint. That's an incredible number. And they're allowing teams to shoot over 50% of their shots from three. And so what they're banking on is we're choking the paint. We're not going to get in rotations. And what not getting in rotations does is it allows you to be a great blockout team because you're always attached to someone, and that keeps the other team off the offensive glass. They're doing an incredible job defensively, like 0.95 points per possession defensively over the course of 13 games. I mean, just outstanding numbers. And they have an old group, they got a mature group. I think and again, to my point, teams are only getting 24% offensive rebounds against them. And so
See, that's amazing. And that goes back to what you said at the beginning with what's the first thing you're looking at in that
that's right.
stat sheet is the offensive rebound numbers both ways. And we've got to wrap this up and we could totally keep it going or do another show. What we'll do, if you will, we'll come back in the
Yeah.
season and we'll get back into this in the season and not just picking up from where we left off, obviously, but seeing where it's at, seeing where some of these teams are at and who's made those jumps. But hopefully people will take away from this that yes, we're talking about talent, we're talking about players, but not at one point in time did we bring up who was ranked what, other than me bringing up Robbie Avila. Not at one point did we talk about who was being paid the
Nope.
most, inside of these games. What we're talking about is the margins. What we're talking about is finding an edge. What we're talking about is what your belief system is. And it doesn't matter what sport you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in a sport or not. It doesn't matter if you're a school teacher. It doesn't matter if you run a business, work in a business, if you're a leader, a manager, subordinate, or just getting started. You have to find a way to
That's
impact
right.
winning. And there's so many different ways to go about it. And this has been awesome. I mean, I'm dropping my head because I'm taking some notes and we end up talking to each other. So I know some of the stuff you're saying, but Chris Hollender, this has been awesome. This has been fantastic. Just Play Sports Solutions. You've gotten just a taste of what that company can bring. As he said, they're dealing with over 1,300 teams. Doesn't matter if it's the WNBA, the NBA, college, NFL, college football, NHL. Phenomenal what you're doing. You're one of the smartest people I know, and you are. You have been for a long time. But these 45 minutes have showed a lot of people what I see. So Chris, thank you. And on behalf of the Harbaugh Coaching Academy, this has been Lessons from the Sidelines with Tom Crean. We'll see you next
Thanks,
week.
Coach.